After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. After this, I wonder how long is captured in just those two words. Was it days? Weeks? Up to a month? Think back to what you were doing just a month ago, just before Easter. I don't know about you, but for me, that feels like a lifetime ago. And if you think back to what you were doing just before Easter and everything that's happened between then and now, well, then you've got an idea of just how long the disciples may have been waiting for him to appear and to reveal himself again. After this. Of course, the this is everything that happened between Palm Sunday and that Sunday we talked about last week when Jesus appeared and revealed himself to Thomas, invited Thomas to put his hand into his side. I've always thought that was a strange thing to say. But it was just 2 weeks. The length of a long summer vacation. That's all it was, from Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry to Good Friday and the crucifixion to Easter Sunday and the resurrection, and then the next Sunday with Thomas. It was just 2 weeks. And it had been an absolute whirlwind. Elation and despair, heartbreak, indescribable joy. It was the most intense and exhilarating time of their lives. And now that Jesus was risen from the dead, well, anything seemed possible. And so, of course, they were waiting for Jesus to appear again. Because, well, when a dead man comes back from the dead, what else do you do but wait around for him to show up and to see what's going to happen next? And so that's what they did. They waited. Days, weeks, up to a month. Nothing. You can imagine how the first few days they all stayed together in that room because, well, that's the place that had happened, so we're not going to leave here. And as they were waiting, they would tell the story to each other over and over and over again. They would say how foolish we were not to believe the women who told us that he had risen from the dead. And remember how John outran Peter. John's really fast. And did you see the look on Thomas's face when Jesus just like walked through the locked door? Those first few days, they stayed in that room. Then as the days turned to weeks, and they changed up their strategy a little bit. They decided to wait in shifts, going out in small groups to get food or to tend to their families because life goes on, right? But they would always hurry back, always kind of expecting to hear that he had shown up again. But still nothing. And eventually, those expectations faded too. And then finally, when the weeks turned into a month, Peter couldn't take it anymore. And so one day, he just kind of stands up in the middle of the group and he says, "I'm going fishing." And 6 of his fellow disciples say, "We're going with you." And so they head out and they head back to the Sea of Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee. They go back to something comfortable, to something familiar. They take a step back into the routines of their ordinary lives. Of course, there's no way to know exactly how much time passed between Jesus revealing himself to Thomas and Peter's fishing trip. John simply says, "After this." And so much of what we've said so far this morning is conjecture. It's an educated guess. It's based on what we know for certain from the scriptures, but also kind of coloring in the lines a little bit of what those in-between days may have been like for the disciples. But whatever happened in those days, however long it was, however it went down, Peter's fishing trip raises an interesting question for us today. How do you and I experience Jesus? How do we see him? How does he reveal himself when life goes back to normal? When we return to the ordinary, especially after an extraordinary experience of Jesus, kind of one of those mountaintop moments. How do we experience Jesus when we go back to ordinary life? Now, I'm going to make an assumption this morning. I'm going to assume that you have had an experience of Jesus. Because after all, you're here, right? I mean, we've talked before about some sociological trends, the decline in Christendom and cultural Christianity, how people don't just kind of wander into church anymore and find themselves here by accident, especially not the Sunday after Mother's Day or 4 Sundays after Easter. There are 100 other things that you could be doing right now, but you're not. You're here. You chose to be here. It's not a mistake. And I'll bet that the reason you're here, and maybe the main reason you're here, is that you have had some sort of an experience of Jesus, and you're hungry for more. Perhaps you were here on Easter Sunday, maybe even against your will, but you were here on Easter Sunday, and you heard for the first time, or you were reminded about this for real Jesus and how he for real rose from the dead. And even though you've heard the story before, this time it clicked in a new way. Jesus showed up for you. Perhaps you were baptized as an older child or an adult, and you remember what it was like before you knew this Jesus. You remember that feeling of saying, I want to be baptized in the cold water on your head, and what it was like to belong to a people, not based on what they could do for you or you could do for them, but simply based on what Jesus has done for all of us. Perhaps you've been to a national youth gathering, or maybe you're getting ready to go this summer for the very first time, and you've been kind of going through this experience of tribes on Wednesday nights, growing in your faith with peers, and you're looking forward with anticipation to that day in just a couple of months when you will gather with 20,000 other young people your age to worship Jesus and to learn more about him, what you believe and why it matters. Maybe you've had a dream where God spoke to you, or an answered prayer, or simply faithful friends and family who reflect to you the faithfulness of God. I don't know what it is for you, at least not all of you. I'm willing to bet that the reason you're here today, maybe the main reason you're here today, is that you have had an experience of Jesus, an extraordinary experience, where you know without a doubt that this Jesus is for real and that he is for you. And so you're back and hungry for more. And if that's you, then perhaps you can relate to why the disciples were waiting in that room for Jesus to reveal himself again. Why they were waiting to have that experience, that moment again. And maybe like the disciples, as the days turn to weeks, the weeks to months, the months to years, or even decades, you've begun to wonder if you will see him or experience him in that way again. Or maybe it was just a moment, a one-off. An extraordinary experience to be sure, but now it's time to go back to ordinary life. And you wonder, will I still get to see him? Will he still reveal himself to me? Or was that it? The end of John's gospel is it's kind of interesting how it's broken up. For the last few weeks, we've been in chapter 20 with the post-resurrection accounts and Jesus immediately Easter and the Sunday after. But before this, kind of at the end of that chapter, we get this text. We read it last week. I invite you to read it with me again from the end of John chapter 20. It says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot like an ending to me. Like John could have stopped writing after the end of chapter 20, and we would have never known about this fishing story and Jesus talking to Peter and everything that comes after. We would have never known. And to be honest, we probably wouldn't have missed it, because this sounds like a pretty good ending to the book. But John had more to say. And so he kept on writing, almost like an epilogue to a book or a PS at the end of the letter. He had a little bit more to say. And I think he wrote chapter 21, the one that we heard today, for Christians like you and me. Specifically for those who weren't in the room, who didn't physically see Jesus risen from the dead. And the words that we heard last week, for those who have not seen and yet believed. And I think one of the reasons John wrote it is so that we might get a glimpse of how Jesus reveals himself to his followers when you go back to ordinary life. Peter said, "I'm going fishing." And 6 of his friends, the other disciples, say they're going with him. After everything they've experienced, the highs and the lows, the days and weeks and up to a month of waiting, they're looking for something firm, something solid, something real. They go back to what's familiar and comfortable, and they go back to the Sea of Galilee, and they go out fishing, and they fish all night. They're rowing the boat, they're setting the sail, they're dropping the anchor, they're cleaning the nets and preparing them and casting them into the water, and they draw them out again and again and again, and nothing. The nets are empty. And knowing how John likes to work with metaphor, their lives, their attempt at going back to normal without Jesus is empty. An entire night of work and nothing to show for it. But then, just as dawn is breaking, Jesus shows up. This is a picture of sunrise over the Sea of Galilee. It was taken by our worship director, Mark Seneschal, when he was in the Holy Land a couple of years ago. Local legend says that the spot where all of this happened is somewhere near here. I don't know if that's true, but at the very least, this gives you an idea of what it might have looked like on that ordinary morning. Jesus shows up right around daybreak, and of course the disciples don't recognize him. And so after some teasing about their utter failure as fishermen, Jesus gently suggests that they try the other side of the boat, which is kind of an absurd thing to say because this is not a cruise ship. It's not like they have to walk anywhere. It's just kind of going from here to over here. But Jesus says, try the other side of the boat. And wouldn't you know it, when they do what Jesus says, their nets are so full of fish, all 7 of them combined can't pull it in. And it's in that moment that John knows. He cries out, "It's the Lord." Of course it's the Lord. Who else could seemingly out of nowhere make 153 large fish appear in the net? Because remember, this is not the first time Jesus has provided the catch of a lifetime to some failed fishermen. No, it was the same men on the same lake, maybe even the same spot. You know how fishermen like to go to the same spots over and over again. And most importantly, it was the same Jesus, bringing them back to where it all started. A failed night of fishing, throwing the net on the other side, a miraculous catch, and Jesus telling them to follow me, for I will make you fishers of men. See, what's so fascinating about this third way that Jesus reveals himself to his disciples. They don't recognize him by his voice like Mary did just outside of the tomb. And they don't recognize him by his appearance or by his scars like they did in the room or with Thomas a week later. No, this time Jesus reveals himself through his actions, through a sign, through an experience that kind of has Jesus' fingerprints all over it. It's how John recognizes him and says, who but Jesus could do something like this? It must be him. And in that moment, Jesus takes his disciples back through their entire story together. He gives them an anchor for their hearts and minds in one of those extraordinary moments. It's a way to assure them, give them confidence in his continued presence for all of the ordinary days ahead. And of course, it wasn't just the catch of fish. Because when the disciples make it back to the shore, Jesus has breakfast ready for them. Do you remember what's for breakfast? What's on the menu? Fish and bread. The same meal Jesus provided for these same disciples and 5,000 of their closest friends that one day out in the field. Jesus cooks on a charcoal fire. There's only 2 times in the Bible a charcoal fire is mentioned. There's this time, and then that time in the high priest's courtyard when Peter denied and John bore witness as Jesus was lied on and beaten and mocked and ultimately condemned. Because you see, it's not just the joyful moments, right? Jesus reveals himself, he shows himself, he proves himself in the lowest moments as well. And in all of it, from beginning to end, from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows, Jesus shows himself to be the Lord in complete control of the extraordinary moments and the ordinary ones as well. The disciples go out searching for something solid and real, an anchor they can go into the rest of their lives on as they go back to normal, back to ordinary. And Jesus meets them in that need. And in that moment, he reminds them of all of the ways he's shown up in the past, everything that he has done for them. And he anchors them in that story. It's the foundation for all of the ordinary days ahead. And so it is for you. You hear a song from the National Youth Gathering or a particular worship service or even the funeral of a loved one of those moments when Jesus felt particularly close. You hear this song and you're back in that moment. It's like he's appeared again. You're in worship and you see a baptism on a Sunday morning. We've got a few of those coming up. You see a baptism and you remember the day that you were baptized, or even just photographs of mom or dad or your godparents holding you up by the baptismal font. And you remember the promise of God to you, that he has put his name on you and promised to never leave you or forsake you. There's a verse particularly meaningful to you that just so happens to be your devotion a particular morning. Or a friend brings a word of encouragement at just the right moment, or an answered prayer. All of these ways, right there, in the middle of ordinary life, and Jesus shows up. Anchors that remind us of his faithfulness in the past and call us in to even those ordinary moments, knowing that he shows up there too. Someone a lot smarter than me once compared the Christian life to rowing a boat, that you go in the evenings with confidence and faith that he will reveal himself again. So this week, have your eyes and ears open. Be paying attention. How will Jesus show himself to you this week? How will you experience him again? In Jesus' name, amen.